Yes, we are. So, hello, everyone. This is Marla Marasco, Down Syndrome Mom Advocate, and I just wanted to say Happy World Down Syndrome Day. I have my lovely shirt on, and I just wanted to say Happy World Down Syndrome Day to everybody, and welcome a friend of mine, a fellow advocate, Brian Herndon. And Brian lives in Missouri with his 4 children and his wife, Jenny. And Brian is the director of the Midwest Center for Inclusion. So welcome, Brian. I appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you, Marla, for having me. I really appreciate being here as well.
Great. So just tell us a little bit about your beautiful family and what you all like to do.
Sure. Well, like Marla said, I have a wife, her name's Jenny, and we have 4 kids, 13, 11, 9, and almost 7. So we are a very busy family. My 9-year-old son is our child with Down syndrome. We have soccer and baseball that is coming up real soon, so we'll be crazy busy with that because those overlap a little bit. We just got done with basketball. We've got dance and football and Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts. And when we have a break from all of that, we like to go camping and go traveling. So that's pretty much our lives.
Good. Well, that is definitely busy. So yes, so your son Nate. So he was born with Down syndrome. How old is he?
He is 9 years old.
Okay. And so how have you made it your mission to educate for him in the schools? I know you're an inclusion advocate. So how do you go about advocating for him in the schools?
You bet. Well, it all kind of started several years ago when my son was actually transitioning from preschool into the K-12 world. And I happened to be the director of an early childhood center at that time for children with special needs, as well as a Title I preschool. And I just saw over and over and over again that children were going directly into self-contained classrooms, even at the preschool level. And I was LEA because I was the director of that program. So I was LEA for hundreds of IEP meetings during the course of that time. And just over and over, all of these children were going to these self-contained classrooms, mostly for intellectual disabilities or for autism. And they weren't really going into the general education classrooms. And I felt like my son really deserved the opportunity to be in a general education classroom. Right. And so I really started doing a lot of research and realizing that we needed to have real, genuine conversations about where to provide those services to children with special needs. Excuse me. And we needed to do it in the general education classroom as a first step. And that just wasn't happening. So I really took it upon myself because I knew that no one else was going to advocate for my own son. Right. And so I took it upon myself to educate myself informally and to understand the law a little bit better so that I could be an advocate for him. And that's kind of blossomed from there.
So when you say an LEA, what exactly does that stand for?
It's the local education authority. So when you have that IEP meeting, every single IEP meeting should have an LEA, which is the person who is authorized to authorize funds for the services that are being provided or being suggested in the IEP meeting.
Okay. So I wonder if that's we don't have that here in Massachusetts. So I'm actually wondering if that's what they consider our team chair. Probably, I guess.
Probably. Usually it would be like a school principal. It could be like a education director.
Yeah. That makes sense.
In Missouri, we're using process coordinators.
Okay.
So you should have that. They may not use that term, but
right.
Have that.
Right. Yeah. Because so then our principal is in the meetings. Because when you said that, I was like, I'm trying to figure out what LEA would stand for. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for explaining that. So yeah, I know you have a very extensive background in education and policy. In fact, you have a Ph.D. in educational leadership and policy. So congratulations, that's exciting. And you also have a graduate certificate in leadership in special and inclusive education. That is something I'm really excited to hear more about. So, talk to us about, going into those studies.
You bet. So as I was learning more about special education, I'm a trained educator. So I've taught elementary school and been a principal my entire career. And as I began to understand special education a little bit more, I realized that I needed some formal training. And so I was looking around for programs that would help me with that formal training. And I actually found one through the University of Kansas online, so I don't have to leave my living room. And I've been able to complete the courses online, and I've truly learned a lot about the law, a lot about both the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And I use that information. I feel like the law is really good for parents because it really does point us in the direction of providing services in a general classroom. Unfortunately, a lot of IEP teams don't start there, and that's where things tend to go south and parents get frustrated. But I just really felt the need to kind of formalize my learning, I guess you will, or if you will, so that I can better advocate not only for my own son, but I also feel that I need to advocate for other people, because there's so many families. Like I said, when I was the director of the Early Childhood Center, there were so many families that would come through and just not really understand that process. Right. And they would sometimes get on the other end of that process and be frustrated and not really know why they're frustrated, but just not be satisfied and not know what to do with it at that point.
Well, and I think, there's so much, acronym slangs and you're not slangs, but, acronyms and different terminology that's, thrown out at you at these IEP meetings. And, if you're really not educated with what all that stuff means, it's overwhelming, and so I love that you do that, because that's actually something I need to start looking into. So how long did that class take you then? It was like 2 years or something?
It's 12 credits, so it's 4 classes. Okay. So what we did, 1 class per semester, so 4 semesters. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was gonna say, you're right. A lot of parents that they're not trained educators, right. And in these meetings we all talk with our educator speak or educator lingo, and right. We forget that parents don't know. Right. And parents trust us as educators to make the right decisions. And I think sometimes unintentionally, schools kind of just steamroll through the process because they've got so many, or it takes a long time and they want to get through it. And on the backside, parents are kind of left going, what just happened? I don't really understand. And why doesn't my kid get to be in his first grade classroom anymore? I don't get that, Right. And then, a year or 2 down the road, they're like, wait a minute, my kid's never going to that class, Yeah. Yeah. They're frustrated with it.
And so, so I know you do a lot of speaking, and so mm-hmm. Do you do that in the schools, or do you do it to parent groups? Talk to us about that part of your advocacy. Sure,
I do. I do some speaking engagements around the Midwest, and mostly parent groups, Down syndrome groups, some community support groups, things like that, as far as training to help people better understand the law. To help them better understand just what inclusion really is, because it might not be what you think it is. And I'll touch on that here in a minute. I was going to say, could you talk about that? I will. But I talk a lot about the law. I talk a lot about the 6 principles found in IDEA. I talk a lot about just how to support kids in that general education classroom so that they can be successful. So I do a lot of trainings with that. But then I also do a lot of just, attending meetings, talking with parents one-on-one, things like that as well. But then, so the inclusion piece, I think sometimes we as parents get hung up on inclusion as being present in the classroom. Right. And as a principal, I saw many times children with disabilities present in a classroom, but they would be off in the corner reading a book on the beanbag while the rest of the class is learning their social studies lesson. Exactly. Or their science lesson. And on paper, that is that child's general education time, and that's their inclusion time, but they're no more included than if they were outside the classroom. That's correct. Because they're not part of the group. And so if you think about inclusion, not just being in the class all the time, because I think there are times that it might be appropriate for a child to be out of the classroom, and that's why it's an individualized education plan. But if you look at what they're doing what they're doing when they are in the classroom, correct. What is that culture that the teacher has set up to make sure that that children with disabilities are valued and honored for what they bring to the table? That there's modifications and accommodations to support the child to access the general education curriculum. I also think that teachers can facilitate friendships. You can't force anyone to be someone's friend, right. But if you can try to facilitate, small group learning and including that child in that, I think it goes a long way to normalize disability, if you will.
Absolutely.
In the eyes of those without disabilities, as well as in the eyes of those with disabilities. So inclusion isn't just being in the classroom.
And I've been able to complete the courses.
Oops, sorry about that. So I actually do have a question about that because, I think for me, my son is in 5th grade and he is in the general education classroom. But, to your point, what I'm actually finding is that because he does have the one-on-one aid, he does sit in the back of the classroom. Now he's in like a pod, I guess you will, with other kids.
Sure.
But there's no interaction, if any, and it's really stifling his learning at this point, and it's really sad. And, I actually asked the general education teacher in our IEP meeting the other day, what interaction do you have with him?
There wasn't much.
I was like, okay, morning meeting.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I should probably interact with him more. Well, you are the teacher. This is
Absolutely.
Just me, right? This
Absolutely.
is just a paraprofessional.
Yep.
She's really technically not the teacher.
Yep.
And
something.
This is 5th grade, Brian. What is going on?
And I think what happens, and this is another thing I'm really passionate about, and I bring this up in our meetings, and I will say I don't mind putting things out there, because if I don't, no one else will.
Right.
But I will say that I really want the classroom teacher to be my son's teacher. I really want the paraprofessional to be a support. And we actually requested that our son not have a one-on-one paraprofessional, but there be an environmental paraprofessional that is in that class to help everybody. Because really, my son, when he has someone kind of over his shoulder all the time, he gets really frustrated with that, and his behavior actually increases. His negative behavior actually increases.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Because we all would if we all had a shadow.
That's the thing is, like, we entrust the school with our kids for what, 6, 7, 8 hours of the day. And then when you really start asking questions, you're like, wow, what is happening? And so I'm going to post this up here because I see some people on the broadcast. So
let me address it just a little bit more. The other piece of it is I think a lot of general education teachers don't feel truly qualified to have children with disabilities in the classroom. I know when I went through my education courses to become a teacher, I had one course on special education, and it was a pretty broad overview. Yeah. And I really applaud those universities and colleges that are kind of doing away with special education and doing away with general education and just really kind of combining them so that that people can graduate from those schools feeling like they can walk in and teach special education or regular education or a combination of both, that they're qualified to do both. And I think when teachers start to feel that they can do it, you're going to see teachers step up and say, I have interaction with him all the time. I help him. I pull him up for small group. I do this, that, and the other thing. And that paraprofessional really comes in when I need an extra hand. Yeah.
So I guess, with that said, and, Nancy, thank you for being here. You had a very great comment. It sounds like there's a need for teacher training. I mean, how do you go about when you're in an IEP meeting and you really want, so I guess there's two questions here. So in hindsight, again, at the time, a one-on-one aid was necessary for my son. Absolutely. Right?
Yeah.
Is it now? Probably not. So we are in the discussion of parafading because what's happened is now he's become prompt dependent.
Yep.
And, I want parents to know that I'm not saying don't go for the para, don't go for the supports, the one-on-one, but maybe it needs to be spelled out a little bit differently in an IEP meeting.
I think it does.
In an IEP, like what they actually will be doing.
Right. I think you're right because, again, it's an individualized plan. So there are kids that are going to be older that need that one-on-one. There will be kids that are younger that don't need that one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
But I certainly think that having that conversation, and that's another thing that I just feel like needs to happen with IEP meetings is that you get in there and have a genuine, real conversation about this stuff. And if as a team you decide that that's not necessary, base it on the data. Base it on the needs of the child.
Exactly.
And that's why I said with my own son, he really hates having a shadow, but he really needs someone to help him with the work, And so we've worked long and hard to back that person off.
And can you just talk about how you did that? Because I think that's really important, not getting very personal, but just, helping myself truly. I mean, I'm asking because this para has literally been stuck to my son like glue. And it's sad because this was a very, he had high self-esteem. He was very independent. And we're almost now going backwards in 5th grade with, I don't know what to do, Mom. You do it for me. You do it for me. And so, how do you have that discussion and how do you now successfully fade this para out without frustrating a child who is now so dependent on this person?
Yeah. And I think for us, it was just, it was me being a broken record, honestly, of saying, I think that she gives too many prompts. I think that, I would have conversations with the principal. I never wanted to offend her because I loved that she loved my son. And to be in a building where my kid was loved and valued was important.
Correct.
But I also felt like it was almost too much support. And so I would talk with the principal and I would talk with the special ed teacher and I would say, I really want her to back off a little bit. I really want her to allow him to fail. Allow him.
Exactly.
Treat him like the other children. And it took a long time. I mean, it took a long time for them to finally kind of realize that my son was an independent and autonomous learner. We actually had someone from the Kansas City Down Syndrome Guild come up and do some observations, and they kind of gave us that term that he was independent and autonomous learner. And so I really kind of latched onto that and and used that to say, he still needs the help, but be in the back of the room, be helping other children so that, that he doesn't feel like he's got a shadow, and he feels like he's just a regular part of the classroom. So it was a long process, and we actually had a new paraprofessional this year, and it was actually a man, and my son responds really well to men. And so really from August till, what are we in March, it's been beautiful. That guy actually got a new job somewhere else, and so he's got a new paraprofessional. And it's a little bit more of a struggle right now, I'll be honest. And so we're kind of holding our breath. Right now.
So I guess the question that I do have a question for you, and I typed it in the box there. But if anybody has any questions of Brian, please make sure you type them below. I can see them and I can post them on the screen. But I am going to ask this again. This is a personal question because my son now is going to be transitioning into 6th grade, and we're getting the talk about he may do better in that learning center model, that separate classroom. And I don't want that. Okay. This has not been my husband and my mission at all. We have stayed on the course of general ed. But now I'm hearing these little people talking in the back of my head going, well, he is pretty far behind, right? Maybe that might help him. I don't want to say get caught up because I don't like using that terminology, but succeed and feel like he's accomplished something and feel good about himself instead of literally sitting in the back of the classroom with worksheets all day. So I don't, I'm torn, which way do I go? Which way do I go? So I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, I think that when it is so hard, and we're not quite there yet. My son's in 3rd grade, but I do feel like any decision you make, I always say, make it based on the data. You know,
Right.
so if the school is saying, oh, I think he needs to be here, well, what data do you have to support that? And then always have that question or that conversation about how can we provide that service in the general education classroom? Even though he may be going to middle school and we're switching classes, that can still happen, and it happens successfully for people. And I think sometimes, and I had to really talk to our team because they were kind of freaked out that he didn't know his math facts and was going to struggle. And I said, honestly, I don't care if he ever learns his math facts. He's going to have a calculator.
Right. Right.
I want him to understand the process. I want him to understand that when you have a plus sign, it means you add, you combine things together. When you have, multiplication, division, I wanted him to understand the process of that.
Right.
And so I think you have to almost get away from, that they're going to catch up, because they're always going to be behind. They're never going to catch up.
Absolutely.
It's always going to be, a few steps behind. But I also think just having that real conversation about how can we provide the services in the general education classroom, because that's what the law supports that. And then as a team, you may all as a team go, you know what, it would be better for him based on X, Y, and Z.
Correct.
And so, once you get to that place, I feel like you can walk away from the table feeling like, okay, we're all on the same page. But until that happens, there's just going to be that battle, that frustration of it didn't go the way we want. Now my kid's being pulled out, and I think you have to ask the teacher as well. I point blank ask teachers at times, what are you doing in the classroom to facilitate, this child feeling like they're a part of the group,
Right.
of the class community, know.
I like that class community. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you have to have those conversations, and it's not going to be perfect, and there's going to be hiccups and bumps along the way, and it's going to be a battle every year. It feels like,
Right.
I think when you have those conversations and that people are honest and really truly look to see how they can provide the services in the general ed classroom, I think those who are really fighting for that piece will be satisfied.
Right. Right. Good. So, with that said, so is there just like one tip, something that somebody can walk away from this saying, Brian made a really good point about, what I can do to make sure again, if this is what they want, to push for inclusion and,
right.
Bring that to their IEP meeting. Is there one tip that, one nugget of information they can say, oh, I heard this,
Mm-hmm.
and repeat it in an IEP meeting?
Yeah, I think, and I actually dug my son's IEP out here to use as an example. I think, you go through the first page, it just has your information. You go through the present level, you look at, the changes, talk about concerns for parents, you get through the goals and special considerations, all that stuff. But when you get to the placement, consideration, and decision page, where they check the little box that they're in the regular education, 80% of the time, 40 to 70, and all that. The word consideration, I think, is very important. So when I ask family members, did you have a conversation about this? And every single time, every single parent has said, no, we never talked about that. Well, to me, consideration means that you're having a real conversation.
Right.
So when you look at that, and you go, okay, so now let's go back to those goals. Let's go back to the services that the district is offering and say, how can we provide those in the general education classroom? And then you have that. So then there's true consideration about how to do this. And you may back off because it may not be appropriate for your child.
Right.
So that's the thing that I try to leave with all parents is that if you can get to a place where you get to that page and you say, okay, now we have to have a conversation about where those services are going to be provided. I did that in my own son's IEP, and everyone at the table went, oh, yeah, I guess we do need to do that. And I was like, yep, we absolutely do. Because every service should be available to each child with a disability along the continuum of placements. And so that's why you talk about services first, so that they're not dictated by the placement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
The services are dictated by the need of the child. So I think, I would leave parents with, get to that page and just say, hey, now it's time for us to talk about where these services are going to be provided. So let's have a real conversation about how to do that. So I think
I mean, I think to your point, I mean, that really is a critical page. I mean, we all sit here and we struggle about, what the goals are going to look like. And I will be honest with you, my biggest mistake was I never really paid much attention to that. Yeah. Right.
Well, and it's glossed over so much because a lot of times, a lot of people say, oh, that's based on the minutes that the child gets. No, it's not, because if I'm a speech therapist, I could dictate your placement by saying, I need you for 120 minutes a week. Boom, I've just taken you out of the classroom.
Correct.
No, offering a service that's portable. And so we're going to talk about later where that service will be provided, but the number of minutes never dictates where the service will be provided.
Right. And then, and with that said, because, that's a really good question. And, back to about, the point of, they're never going to be on task with their classmates as far as the grade level curriculum. But right. That, again, to your point, should not dictate where they physically were learning.
Right. And I will often hear people say that the IEP team says, oh, because your child is so far behind, they can't be in the class. It's now a different curriculum, blah, blah, blah. And I would just challenge people to say to their team, can you just real honestly, don't be rude about it, but just real honestly, can you show me in the law where it says that?
Right.
And just sit back and be quiet.
Yeah.
And if they can't show, because honestly, I don't find that in the law.
Right.
And so if you can say, where is that in the law? And then the team kind of goes, oh, I don't know what to do. Then you go, okay, it's not really there. So let's go back to what is in the law. And that's providing services in the least restrictive environment. And the presumption is that that location is the general education classroom.
Right. And I think that goes back to, the beginning of our interview where you really need to know that law. I mean, you don't need to know verbatim, right?
No.
But you need to know some of it, and you at least know to where to go to if a question comes up,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you ever refer back to that Rights Law website?
I do. Google's my best friend a lot of times. And so I will get on Rights Law. I will get on, I think it's Parent Hub Center, if I'm remembering correctly. I also have, because I'm taking courses as well, I have a lot of textbooks that I refer to as well that really help me dig down deep and figure out, okay, what is the law saying? Is there case law about this? Sometimes there may be case law about different things, that would support your position. And so, I know that sounds overwhelming to parents, and don't be afraid to reach out to an advocate, excuse me, to assist you with that. But always go back to the data. Always go back to the spirit and the letter of the law, and make sure that you as a team are doing the right things.
Right. Right. When you get a chance, could you shoot me some of those titles of the books, and then I can put them below this recording, and then that way I can share it with people.
Well, let me hold up one real quick. That's the
Bible.
Yeah, it's called The Educator's Handbook for Inclusive School Practices. It is super easy to read, and it's short, and it's really practical. So if there are any parents out there that want something, $20-25 on Amazon. It really is a great resource. And it's by Julie Costin. She's out of Syracuse University, and she is so good and knowledgeable about inclusive education.
Great.
But yes, I'll send you some more titles.
That's a great resource. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then actually, I do have a couple more questions. But when, like we said, when things start going south, if you will.
Yeah.
I think it would be really good if you could just touch a little bit upon what are the options for parents when things really start going south with the conversation in those IEP meetings. I know we have mediation, and there's a couple things that they have available to them, but I'd really like to get your opinion on that, because I think that's also a critical point, about what happens. What's my next option out there?
It is. As parents, it's super important to make sure that you read through the procedural safeguards, or the parent handbook, or whatever your state may call it, to make sure you understand your rights there and your obligations. Because when an IEP team really kind of, once you sign over the opportunity for a team to provide your child services, you've given them a lot of power. I'll be honest with you, because they can say, well, this is the team decision and we're going to do it, whether you like it or not. They can do that under the law. You have 10 days to consider that change. But realize on day 11, that change is happening, whether you want it to or not. And so, make sure that you understand that and understand what your responsibilities are in that. If you don't like that, you can let them know, I'm really not comfortable with this. And then it does sometimes then go to mediation at that point, or goes to due process. You hate to get to that place, and sometimes school districts can be honestly jerks about it and dig their heels in. But hopefully people aren't going to do that, because you want that good, positive working relationship with your child's school district, because you're going to be there for a while. So when things go south, make sure you understand the parent rights and responsibilities. That 10-day waiting period, that's your 10 days to do something. Don't come in on day 11 and go, oh, I've changed my mind, I don't want to do it. Well, it's too late at that point. It's happening. And then, try to come to agreement, and also just walk into a meeting knowing that you may not get everything you want. It really is a collaboration. It really is a give and take. And so you may have to decide for yourself, what are the hills I'm going to die on? And what are the things I'm willing to give up a little bit? Not that you just go in and give up right away, but don't go to due process over something that you're not willing to die on that hill. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. And so with that 10 days, I'm going to ask this, is that 10 business days or 10 days, including weekends? Just because I think that's a pretty important point. Oh, you think it's 10 business days and it's not.
Yeah. I would have to double check, but I think it's 10 calendar days.
I think it is too. I think it's
10 calendar days.
Once the clock starts, it starts.
Yeah. So if we have a meeting on the 5th, tomorrow the 6th is day 1.
Right.
10 days later, is the expiration of that.
And then I think the other thing too is important to know is that you don't have to sign anything.
You don't. No.
And so if you don't feel comfortable with it, don't sign it. Walk away and just say, I'm gonna read this over, because they're supposed to give you, like, we call it an N1. I mean, I don't know what they call it, in other states, but they're kind of supposed to give you the notes from the meeting, and then you're supposed to really look at it and be able to digest it, if you will.
Absolutely. And if you're a parent and you're going by yourself and your spouse is not there, or your child's other parent is not there, feel free to tell that IEP team, you know what, my child's other parent couldn't be here. I would really like to take this back before I agree to anything or disagree to anything, so I can share that and go over it. Or if you're both there, feel free, or if you're a single parent, feel free to say, hey, thanks, I appreciate all of this. I would like to take it back and read through it a little bit so that I understand this a little bit better before I say yes or no to anything. Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
And I think the more that you can be pleasant about it, the more that you can be, cooperative and collegial about it, the better it's going to be.
Right. And then, I know I literally just hired an advocate this year. Can you, because you're an advocate, so can you talk a little bit about, parents not having to do this by themselves? They should, especially to your point of, if your husband or your wife or your significant other or your caretaker, whatever, your grandmother, if somebody else is not in that room with you, it's an overwhelming process. And if you can't do it all, maybe put an advocate in that could be your eyes and your ears for you.
Absolutely. Well, I'll be real honest with you. Like you said earlier, I have a Ph.D. I've been a school principal. I've been a teacher. I've been on the education side of that table. But when I walk in as a dad of my son, Nate, I feel intimidated and scared. I'll be honest with you. I do sometimes. And we actually hired an advocate for ourselves this last time, because I know for me, I get a little too passionate about my own child. And it was just very helpful just to kind of maintain that calm in the meeting, that professionalism, to make sure that everyone was on the same page. She would speak up and say, hey, here's what I hear them saying. And the meeting went very differently. And I will tell you, as an advocate myself, I have had many parents tell me, that meeting was so different than any meeting I've ever been in. They treated me professionally. They treated me like I mattered. They treated me like I was knowledgeable, and they have never done that before. And I think, oh my goodness, how sad that you've had all these meetings and never been treated with the respect that you deserve. Yeah. So don't be afraid to hire an advocate. It's worth the money. It really is. Make sure that advocate is on your side, though, because I have had stories of people who've had an advocate that have turned on them in the middle of a meeting.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so that's really awkward, and I'll be honest, I don't mind telling parents the hard news, but I'm going to tell them before the meeting. I'm going to say, hey, you can ask for this, but I'm going to tell you they're going to probably deny it because of X, Y, or Z, Now, obviously in a meeting, if something were to come up that I felt like the school was very right on and the parents were very wrong on, I would probably say, hey, can we take a break for a few minutes? And then I would probably step outside with the parents and say, hey, here's what's happening. And my understanding is that what they're saying is right. What you're wanting for is wrong. How do we want to approach this? But I would never, ever do that in the middle of a meeting, to embarrass anybody. But yeah, absolutely. I think hiring an advocate really gives you peace of mind. It does. And you're hiring someone who's knowledgeable about this process. This is a legal process.
Yeah.
And I'm not an attorney, but knowing the law is very important,
Right. And can you just speak a little bit about neuropsych evaluations? I mean, how do you feel about them? I mean, do they have their place at times, from a data perspective?
It's so interesting. I have always put a lot of weight on IQ scores. And I think that's probably just because I grew up, knowing that was very important.
Right.
And so I was like, yeah, have my son take an IQ test. I'm going to show the world that he can do it. And wow, was I so wrong, because I watched him take the IQ test recently, and it was a mess, and it was not a good representation of his abilities. And so the more I've read about these evaluations and things, I think, especially as far as IQ testing, the IQ test was actually designed to weed out what are called the less desirables in society. And it was created by a known eugenicist. And so I'm really pretty opposed to it morally now, because my son is one of those less desirables that he was trying to weed out of society.
Right.
And so I will never again allow my child to be tested like that again. And so, it is important to understand what a kid knows, but I think you can do that with the daily work. I think we can do that through other evaluations. I think there's a lot to be said, with what the people who know him best bring to the table as far as what he can and cannot do and what we need to do differently. He's still going to qualify for special education. He is a child with Down syndrome, and so I don't know. I'm not a big fan of those types of evaluations anymore, because I've learned the meaning behind them, and I know that's not their purpose anymore, but just because of that, I'm kind of morally opposed to them.
Can you, and I've seen my son take these neuropsych tests as well, and they're like well, for us it was like 2-day, couple hours, sit down and point the box and whatever. But I think it was good for us because it told us some really interesting information about my son, that his profile is a little different than a typical child with Down syndrome. I mean, he's higher on the expressive than he is on the receptive, and that is actually not. I don't want to say typical, but that's not common. That majority, from what I hear, of individuals with Down syndrome, they're higher on the receptive side.
Right.
And I found that really interesting.
That is interesting, and I think you can get that through a language assessment. And I'm not opposed to that. I'm opposed just to the traditional IQ measures.
Yeah.
As far as like language assessment, I'm fine with that. Because those came along later, and those came along, with the desire to try to figure out what the needs were, what was kind of going wrong with it, with a child. So I was speaking more toward the intelligence test.
Yeah.
with language tests, I absolutely think that there's some good value there, because my son actually scores really well with those, and it does give us some good information. You're right.
Yeah, that's good information.
Yeah.
So I know that you and I, we talked about, push-in services, So, when the parents are entering into this IEP season, as we, this dreaded season of gloom and doom, it seems like, particularly, can you clarify about the difference between, like a push-in and a pull out, and the benefits between the benefits in one and or the other? Because I think that is a kind of a new term for me this year, this push in. And I don't know that a lot of parents are hearing that. Yeah. Because it's typical. You want to pull people out to your therapy room or whatever. Yeah. And I get it. Some therapies you do, but you mentioned it before. Speech doesn't have to be a pull out.
Right.
It's an on the road kind of service. So can you talk to us about, push in and pull out?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you a story before I talk about it. But in my son's IEP meeting at the beginning of the year, we really desired for him to receive all of his services in the general education classroom. And I kind of forced the team to have that honest conversation. And they didn't really like that. And at one point, I was pushing for my son to have his reading instruction in the general education classroom as a push-in service. And the special ed director just wasn't quite understanding that. And at one point she piped up and she said, well, if you want that service, that's only offered as a pull-out service. And I said, well, actually, every single service should be offered along the continuum of placements. And so we actually have to have a conversation about how to provide that in the general ed classroom. And she quickly kind of quieted down, and the special ed teacher actually had to say, well, he wants me to go in to provide reading instruction to him. And so we ended up having that conversation. But that's what that is. So my son, he's in the classroom for reading and math, science, social studies, things like that. And he gets reading services and math services. And he has a special education teacher who actually comes in and provides that support for him in the classroom. And so that would be a push-in service where someone is coming in to provide that service in the classroom. And we made sure to have planning time put in my son's IEP so that the regular and the special ed teacher can have time to plan, because they are working on that modified work. Right. They're making the accommodations necessary to help him be successful. And so they're making sure that the work is at a level that is appropriate for him. And when he gets the services, he listens to the whole group lesson. So he's doing the same work, but it's just simpler problems. He's listening to the same lecture, but he's just getting less work. And someone comes in to help with that. And then his paraprofessional is there to help when needed as well. So that would be a push-in service. We also requested, because we felt like speech, his occupational therapy is a push-in service as well. And so it's not going as well as I had hoped, because I think the occupational therapist just pulls him back to the table and does his thing back there at the table. But, it is what it is, and it's in the classroom. But speech, we actually wanted him pulled out for that, because we felt like he still needed to work on some really key sounds that are harder to do in a noisier classroom. We wanted him to be pulled out in isolation for that, so that he could work on those, targeted skills. But I do think you can absolutely, if you're creative, you can absolutely look at how can we provide that in the classroom. Well, you could do that through conversation with peers. You can do that in conversation in book clubs. There's lots of ways to do that. So a pull-out service would be when those services, the child is being pulled out of the classroom to receive that therapy, that special education instruction, whatever, and then they get to go back in the classroom to hopefully then apply it. So that's kind of the difference there. And I'm always about, how can we be creative and try to figure out how to provide that service in the classroom? And so I force the team to at least have that conversation, so that then if we decide it's not appropriate, like we did for my son with speech, then we go, okay, let's point out for that.
Yeah, and to your point, that creative part of it, for speech therapy, my son gets, 3 times a week. And it was not like that. It was only 2. And then the speech therapist that came back and said, I'd like to see him a 3rd time. But again, to me, that's a lot of pull out. And I understand, again, I agree there are, he gets his pull out for OT as well. But I wasn't willing to give up that third 30 minutes, if you will.
Right.
And I said, let's think about how we can do this so that he can be successful in the classroom and still get speech therapy. So we talked about the fact of prepping him to respond to questions,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know, and to your point of, you know, asking someone for help, or in a group setting, you know, taking turns and being and contributing to that discussion. That's very easy to do.
Absolutely.
From a speech therapy perspective. And it doesn't have, you know, again, all speech therapy doesn't have to be set up that way. But I just felt that because you're asking for that third 30 minutes, let's make it in the classroom.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great way to think about it. So maybe for 2 times of his 3 times a week, he's going in isolation, he's practicing, blah, blah, blah. So then that third time, he's got, you know, that speech therapist is going to push in and provide that service. And that could be during reading group or math instruction. It doesn't have to be, you know, it can be during an academic time. And you're practicing those skills that you've been practicing in isolation, because ultimately we want our kids to be able to do this independently with real people who don't have speech, you know, concerns, so that they can either be understood or that they can understand. So I think that's brilliant. Absolutely.
Yeah. 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 So, I mean, I think it's, you know, to your point, it's kind of coming in with a vision, the plan of what you want. You know, I always go with my agenda, because if I don't, you know, I'm gonna get derailed. I'm gonna be over here, and that just, I mean, honestly, it helps us drive the meetings. I mean, because you can get really stuck on one thing, and you're looking at your watch, and it's 2 hours later, and you're like, oh my gosh, I have 5 more questions.
Or we haven't even gotten to the goals yet. Yeah,
I know, exactly.
Well, that's something that we learned way early on with the Kansas City Down Syndrome Guild. We're not too far from Kansas City. Is to create a vision for your child, because, you know, my world's mostly early elementary, you know, and I think about, okay, Nate's 9 years old, but we need to think about 25-year-old Nate. Right. You know, 25-year-old Nate, we hope he gets to go to college. We hope he has a job. We would love it if he got married. We would really love it if he lived on his own, you know. Right. And so that's what we're working towards. So everything we do in that meeting, even in 3rd grade, should be pointing us to 25-year-old Nate. And absolutely. And if his goals are going to be brushing his teeth and washing his hands and learning how to take turns in a board game, and he already knows how to do that stuff, that's not pushing him toward college. Right. That's not pushing him to learn his math and to learn to read and to learn to write and get his ideas down. So his goals need to be leading him toward a college, you know, opportunity. He may later decide he doesn't want to do that, but right now I'm in charge. And so I'm going to make that decision. Exactly. You know? Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. And, you know, I had a friend say to me, because, you know, my son will be 12 tomorrow. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. You know, and so, you know, that transition process starts at 14, right? Yep. You're not too far away. So they then start coming in and advocating. Well, I mean, they haven't been in this process for 15 years or whatever, you know. Right. And now all of a sudden they're supposed to come in and say what they want, right? Well, I think that's a little kind of unfair, but so I actually brought my son in the other day, and I gave him, like, I found this, you might even have posted it. Somebody posted it. And anyway, it was this really cool graphic about, like, I have the rights, and it was a few things, but I only picked 4 of them. And one of them was, you know, I had the right to have a teacher who believes in me. Absolutely. I have the right for my para or aide, however you want to talk about, to not be my group partner. And absolutely, that is just, I mean, and I did it purposely because, again, he's transitioning into the middle school. So I wanted that, which we would call a team chair, to start thinking, oh, I need to listen to this kid, because, you know, this is for life now. I mean, he has this right. And you guys have always just brushed all that off, right? Yeah. And so I want him to start thinking that way. But, you know, a friend of mine told me, you know, make sure, and again, your child is younger, but for those that might be listening to this even on the replay, you know, my son's going to be 12. We're going to be going into the middle school, and, you know, we go from there. And she goes, make sure you add the 18 to 22 residential program in your vision statement. And I was like, what? And she goes, if you don't get it in there,
then you come back to your point and you say, hey, there's a really great life skills program down the street that I'd love for my son to be a part of, live on campus, right?
Yeah.
They're going to be like, no, they might balk you a little bit. They may say, but now they know that our mindset is leaning towards that.
Absolutely.
That program.
Absolutely.
So I think that's where it's really important to get that stuff in your vision statement.
It is. Absolutely. Because, like I said before, you're not just thinking about 5-year-old, 10-year-old child. You're thinking about 25-year-old.
Correct.
So it's very important to always be working toward that. And what is your hope and dream for that child when they're an adult?
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, this was an awesome interview, Brian. I mean, I know I learned a lot. I hope those that were on the interview, listening, if there's anybody that has any questions, again, type it down below. I can see the comments. There might be people watching on the replay that have some questions, so I can get that information for you. But again, I want to say thank you. And is there one more tip or takeaway that you want to share with us?
Just know that you are your child's best advocate, and you have what it takes. You do. You love your child. You know your child best, and don't be afraid to put that out there. So that's my advice.
Right.
And don't be afraid to hire an advocate. It really does give you peace of mind, even for those of us who are advocates.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's that extra eyes and ears, because you're thinking about what they're talking about, and that person's over here going, that ain't going to work.
Right.
That's not going to work, or, whatever. So it's definitely important to have that second set of eyes, that second set of ears. And to your point, it really is worth the money, because it's going to give you that peace of mind.
It absolutely is. Yep.
Well, I, again, very much appreciate you taking the time with us today, and give Nate a hug for me. And thank you for all that you're doing for our kids. I know I appreciate it.
Well, thank you as well. I love this. I love just seeing you on Facebook and seeing what you're doing. So
thank you.
We're doing important work. We are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Brian. Well, thank you very much, and have a great day.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.